Good afternoon. I'm Chief Meteorologist Jesse Gunkel with the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center at 4 p.m. Again, we are starting to see Laura strengthen slightly out there. We're seeing more signs of organization now in the Central Gulf as you speak. Again, look at the picture behind me, and you'll notice again, we're starting to see some banding features out there. And if you look closely, you can see the inflow coming into this system. A lot of thunderstorm activity, convection kind of developing around the center, but it's almost starting to develop an eye, and most likely will over the next few hours. One of the reasons why we're starting to see this storm strengthen. Right now, those winds are sitting at 80 miles per hour. Again, that's a good indication of there's some intensification going on within this system. However, as you notice, we still got a lot of thunderstorm activity kind of on the tail end. It's kind of fanned out. Again, this is becoming a pretty massive system. We're already starting to see some of those outer bands kind of scrape the northern Gulf Coast, and some of those showers extending well back into the Yucatan Peninsula. Again, it's heading west-northwest at 17, and I want to point that out because it's still moving. It's trucking along at a pretty steady pace. If you're going to see a massive system and you want to see it develop and deepen and become a huge system, you want that forward speed to slow down. But if it continues at this rate, it's going to be inland much sooner than we expect. And if that's the case, well, our preparation time drastically goes down. You can see it now. It sits about 480 miles southeast of Lake Charles, Louisiana. So here you go. Big picture on the satellite. You can see exactly where it sits, and as of this morning, it moved quite a few miles now across the Gulf, now in the Central Gulf at this point. As you see, I think the key here is, again, that forward speed, but we're starting to see a little bit of banding. We're starting to see stuff develop around the center of that system. And again, notice how some of those thunderstorms develop well towards the south, kind of that trailing edge at this point. So here's what we've got going on. The latest, because that system is moving at a rather quick pace, you see here that tropical storm warnings have been issued now. That means tropical storm conditions, or at least winds, are likely within the next 36 hours. So by tomorrow morning, at least along the coastline, we could already start to see some tropical storm gusts, mainly just around Morgan City. We're talking near Grand Isle, a lot of those areas, and then eventually kind of moving inland to areas such as Houma, Thibodaux, and Napoleonville. I also want to point out there is a hurricane warning now for much of the southwestern portions of the state, and even for portions of southeast Texas. And again, that's mainly along the Texas state border as we move in. So again, expect hurricane conditions within the next 48 hours. And here's again just a look at those tropical storm force winds, and you see the potential for the capital area sitting pretty high at about 60 to 70%, especially across the river, to see tropical storm force winds at times. Not sustained, but gusts, potential even if the system walks a little bit further east, right around the core, we could even see some hurricane force winds. So not expected to be long and sustained, but some gusts out there that could do plenty of damage. And that's why the winds are of high concern for us, because also if we get the heavy rainfall to start moving in early tomorrow, then we get those winds, then we got to be concerned about our trees falling on our power lines and maybe even falling on property. So that is an issue as we continue to move into the overnight hours. That's why we're watching this track very closely out there. And you see, again, just kind of giving you an idea where those potential wind gusts, and you notice by the time we get to about 11:30 tomorrow night, chance for some tropical storm force winds, or at least winds up to 32 miles in the capital area. Cameron 61, and Galveston sitting at about 56. But watch what happens. Lake Charles 97 mile per hour winds out there. Cameron at 92, just shy of 100. Baton Rouge coming in at 40. So again, if you imagine the track goes maybe 30 miles east, and those stronger winds could be in the 50 to 60, maybe even 70 mile an hour range for us in the capital region. And then I don't believe those winds really don't start dying down. It's going to be pretty breezy throughout much of our Wednesday and much of our Thursday at this point. So here's your storm surge, and this is what we've got going on. Notice just south of Lake Charles, we're talking, I think it's Calcasieu Lake, 9 to 13. So again, that is a wall of water. Vermilion Bay, 7 to 11, a little bit further east, so around Grand Isle, 4 to 6, and near the mouth of the Mississippi, 3 to 5. Inland lakes right now, tropical storm watch, about 2 to 4, just mainly because we're going to have a pretty persistent easterly flow at this point. So there's another factor I want to show to you guys, because we're watching closely to see exactly how far this ridge backs in. And what's going to happen is if it continues to keep moving in this direction, well, that's going to drive it in a more western pattern. If it doesn't, and it actually starts to retreat and move back towards the east, well, guess what? This system is going to make more of a north turn versus a west turn, and that could be meaning more impacts on Louisiana as we move forward. So what I do want to point out is there's a pretty deep trough here, and that's helping to guide this system right here, which is eventually going to take the system north, Laura north, and drive it up towards the Texas state line. So depending on when the two meet, right now it seems like that trough seems to be a little bit stronger at this point, kind of swirling out there versus that ridge. And we could actually start to see those tracks come back a little bit east as we make our way into the evening hours. So as you notice, the current track right now sits as a Category 2 in the Central Gulf. By the time we get to about Wednesday afternoon, winds up to 110 miles per hour. By Thursday, early morning or just around midnight, Category 3 around landfall. As you see there, it happens to be right along that Texas state line. And then it starts to drive up through the state, potentially as a Category 1, maybe even a Category 2 going past Toledo Bend, Category 1 around Shreveport, and then it quickly races off towards the east or northeast and through the Tennessee Valley. But the concern about that is feeder bands, and that is going to be part of the concern. Notice that consensus starting to kind of slide up to anywhere between Houston and New Orleans, and I think that's going to be the key. Still, if you live anywhere within the region, stay alert and stay prepared, because there still is that potential for a little bit of shift because of the quick moving pace of Laura at this point so far. So as you see here, looking at your tropical tracker, your future cast, I want to show you that we're going to start to see those rain bands start to move in probably late tomorrow morning, early afternoon. Potential for some heavy rain at times. By 7 p.m. it's approaching the coastline towards southwest Louisiana. You can see it kind of driving in, some of those rain bands extending well into the Gulf of Mexico. Hurricane winds will be mainly just around that core, but could extend about 60 miles from the center. Tropical storm force winds about 175. So that's pretty close to the Baton Rouge area. And then as you see here, especially on the western side of the river. So if you live around the Atchafalaya Basin, expect those stronger winds. But this is my concern here. You'll see that we're going to have the potential for some feeder bands. This is where you start to spawn some of those isolated tornadoes out there. You get that increase in tornadic threat, potential for a tornado watch, and also some very intense rainfall where we could easily see 3 to 6 inches of rain per hour. And here's the key. It sits over us for quite a few hours, maybe even up to about 6 to 12 hours. And that's why we have to focus our attention mainly north of I-12, our Amite River Basin, the Comite, and the Amite River for that potential high rain and maybe even some flash flooding in the area. So again, these are estimates right now, most likely 3 to 5 for us, but locally we could see more in higher amounts, and it just depends on where those feeder bands really begin to set up. And you can see that potential rainfall, and that model obviously kind of shows you. I'll back it up just a little bit here, and if I can do it, you'll notice that, maybe I can't back it up. All right. You'll see kind of some of those feeder bands kind of moving in a little bit closer to the capital area where it gets a little bit heavier out there, and I think that's going to be somewhat of the issue moving forward. So on average, I would say 3 to 5, obviously more west of the Mississippi River. Locally, obviously some higher amounts. We've got to see where those feeder bands set up, because that's where we could see some very alarming rain totals. But I do want to point out, tropical storm force winds most likely here. There is a potential for maybe 1 or 2 hurricane wind gusts around Acadiana if you're watching from that general area. So we could get some winds at 75 plus at this point. Other areas, again, we're talking 40, maybe 60 at times, but not expected to be sustained. These are more so wind gusts. If you live along the coast, storm surge 4 to 6, mainly from Morgan City to the mouth of the Mississippi River. And again, when you put all these factors together, that's where you just need to be very vigilant out there, because, again, a lot could really happen as we move forward. So have some trusted sources out there. I'm trying to answer as many questions as possible. Again, what's the possibility from Brittany White of this system shifting further towards Texas? Again, that is a potential. If it gets around that ridge and the system slows down a little bit, it should drive west. If it doesn't, if it continues with the pace, there is a potential it could start tracking back towards the east at this point. Again, it's not really, it's where the current situation now stands. So if you're thinking about evacuating, they've already started doing mandatory evacuations for a lot of areas. We're talking Cameron Parish, and because of that, if you live in that area, it might be a better idea to go west towards Austin. If you live around here, probably head north or even further east of New Orleans would be your best bet at this point to get out of the area if you're just worried. Now, if you do live along the coastline, my guess, I guess the best thing that you could possibly do at this point would be to move a little bit further inland. Try to get a little bit north of I-10 so you don't have to worry about rainfall. Maybe call up some family and friends and just see if you've got a better location. So again, we're talking mainly north of I-10, which would be a safer place to be at this point. But you also got to remember that this system could make landfall as a Category 3, which is a little bit different than what we saw with Rita. I know a lot of people go back, well, I remember Rita and how much damage. Rita was a Category 5, and it started down cycling by the time it made landfall. This is actually going to be growing by the time it makes landfall, and luckily for us, again, it can't get to its probable full potential before landfall, and then it starts to move inland, still potentially as a Category 2 past Lake Charles, so that's all the way across I-10, and then it slides across the interstate as a Category 2, Category 1, Toledo Bend, Category 1, and maybe even a Category 1 all the way up to about I-20. So again, those are some very strong winds. I mean, obviously we're talking winds at 110 plus just along the coastline. So as you notice, that area also, a lot of water, a lot of bayous, a lot of streams, a lot of big lakes there. Even as far north as Lake Charles, we've got a lot of water there that you're going to see that water get pushed in quickly into a lot of areas, and potentially you even see some backwater flooding in a lot of areas. Even across the Atchafalaya Basin, a lot of that water could get quickly pushed inland into a lot of those rivers, mainly the Atchafalaya, so Morgan City. Stay on high alert because there is that potential for some flooding, obviously, too, for heavy feeder bans currently in place. So if you have any more questions, just please let us know. Also, download our app at brproud.com. We're just about to go live later on at 5 o'clock this evening for the very latest. The governor will be speaking at 6 with preparations across the state. We're talking road closures, mandatory evacuations, what the Department of Transportation is currently doing across the state, school closures. We'll have it all coming up this evening. And again, if you haven't downloaded the app, it's free, and it's got all the information you need at the palm of your hand. Thanks for joining us this evening. Please stay safe, and if you have any questions, again, drop us a line on the bottom of the page.